Okay, we got a whole bunch of folks who've joined the session now. Okay, Rob seems to have some trouble with authentication. David's helping him out. We will go ahead and get started. All right. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us on day 3 for this panel discussion on building an innovation economy in the Orlando region. So glad you could join us. We are about to have a vigorous, transparent conversation that I personally hope will crystallize some of Orlando's unique strengths, but let's shed some light on some of the things that are holding this region back. And maybe, just maybe, we can catalyze some ideas that take us forward and maybe launch us into that innovation economy that we all want to be a part of. So some quick introductions first. I'll go first. My name is Rajiv Menon. I'm the CEO at Informulate. We are a software and innovation consulting company that's based here in Orlando. I am also the organizer for the Techstars Startup Week in Orlando event, and I'd be remiss if I didn't brag about our region on that count, because for 2 of the last 3 years, our City Beautiful has won the Global Startup Challenge across 150 cities on the Startup Weekend Global Battle. So we're very proud of that. So we do have some things going right. Although the pandemic prevents us from having another Startup Week in Orlando this year, we hope that you'll check us out at startupweekinorlando.com. All right, enough about me. Let's talk to our experts here. We'll start with ladies first. Andrea Wesser-Brawner is the Chief Innovation and Emerging Technologies Officer at Orange County. Her past experience was as a Senior VP at the International Business Innovation Association, which is a global organization helping entrepreneurial support organizations like accelerators and incubators. So, Andrea, would you like to add some more context there? And feel free to talk about a little bit about how you look at the community and what impact you're trying to create.
Sure. So, great to meet everybody. I know a ton of you, so you've probably heard me already get on my soapbox and talk about some of the things that I'm passionate about seeing in our community. But to Rajiv's background about me, I'm pretty jazzed after working for NBIA for a couple of years, seeing really the best in class for entrepreneurship programs and industry diversification, frankly, in the world. And so what I'm hoping to do is bring in some of those, external from Central Florida and really out of the state expertise as part of my role with the county. And, just to say that with the county, it's not just about the boundaries of the county, but our region and even our state, because we know that there's some great talent here. It's really more about, sexy marketing and making sure that we're getting the globe knowing about our prowess. So events like Digital Orlando and even our simulation summit from yesterday, some very incredible talent, small innovative businesses, and some of the cool things, agile things that our larger industry is doing. We just need to get that word out there. And so that's really part of the innovation economy aspect that I'm passionate about and that I'm hoping, in my role that we'll bring. Been a little sidelined in terms of time frame because of COVID management. I think a lot of people don't realize that the county is responsible for the $243 million that's supposed to go right back out to the community. But with that comes a little bit of a kludgy application process, if you will. So right now, most of my innovation work has been trying to make it unkludgy and as easy as possible to work with us. I know some folks, especially in the individual assistance part, has had, some complications, and we're consistently trying to improve that. But, hopefully that's behind us come December. And there'll be some really cool projects that we'll be able to work with everybody about. You heard me allude to that on Tuesday. But I'm really excited to hear what everybody else has to say and get their point of view as well in here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Andrea. Next up, we'll talk to Tiffany Spencer. She is the Chief Operating Officer at ESOR Consulting Group and the founder of HBCU Force, which deals with Salesforce application in the HBCU community. She's also the president of Black Orlando Tech, which is doing some phenomenal work in bringing much needed diversity into our tech community, but more importantly, bringing access to tech opportunities to the broader community. So with that, Tiffany, if you want to add more context about your background and the impact that you're trying to create.
Yeah, so my background is in Salesforce in the Salesforce ecosystem. I've been doing Salesforce consulting work for over 13 years. The work with Black Orlando Tech, though, Black Orlando Tech has been around since 2016. And we are a nonprofit organization that is working to accelerate minority economic advancement through tech careers. Studies have shown for various reasons that the Black community is underrepresented within the tech workforce. And we have many programs where we are looking to close those gaps through grassroots efforts and direct-to-community initiatives. So one, we are working to cultivate partnerships with businesses, academic institutions, professional and government organizations. We have a number of programs, and as well as developing pipelines for minorities to leverage careers and entrepreneurial resources through Central Florida. Currently, we're running 3 different initiatives. So we have our monthly meetup, which we call our Tech Talks, where we highlight different tech organizations and local companies so that we can make sure the community is aware of them and how they can be involved. We have our Tech Startup Series, which works with individuals to help them understand what it takes to participate in programs like Starter Studio and other accelerators, and it's to prepare them for those environments, the startup environment. And then we have our Tech Cohort, our Building Bot series, where we do 8-week tech cohorts to allow individuals to add tech skills to their resume, or it could be their first introduction to a tech skill, with the goal of being to get those individuals, again, career ready and get them jobs here locally, because there's lots of tech talent that we believe can be filled with local individuals.
That is phenomenal. Thank you so much, Tiffany. There's so much there that has been done in a homegrown nonprofit agency, and it's just amazing to see how fast that has come so far. Great. Next up, we have Dennis Pape. Dennis is the co-founder and CEO at Seed Funders Orlando. He also runs the Venture Scale-Up Accelerator, which until recently was housed in a co-working space called Catalyst Spaces, which he also had launched. Prior to that, Dennis has founded, led, and exited his company called Photonic Systems Incorporated. So he's a tried and tested entrepreneur and innovator. With that, Dennis, feel free to add on to that description and that context and let us know what kind of impact you're trying to create as well.
Great. Well, thanks, Rajiv, and thanks, Digital Orlando, for putting together this panel. So as Rajiv said, I have a long background here in Central Florida. I actually came here, my training is in technology, science, and I came here for a job at Harris Corporation. So I got really involved with technology on the Space Coast, and that's when I started a company called Photonic Systems, and started interacting with Creole, and somewhere along the line met Jason, in fact. And so I came at this entrepreneurship from working at Harris and then leaving and starting my own company and raising venture capital at a time when there was actually a fair amount of venture capital for startups in the Central Florida region. So I've been on both sides of this equation, and I've been involved in activities from Tampa to the Space Coast as well. So happy to participate.
Thanks, Dennis. Fantastic. And next we have Jason Eichenholz. Jason is a serial entrepreneur and pioneer in laser and optics with over 50 patents. He's also the co-founder and CTO at Luminar Technologies, which delivers LiDAR solutions that enable autonomous cars and driving. And of course, the massive news that came out a month or so ago of Luminar going public for a valuation of $3.4 billion, making it one of the biggest exits in our region. He is also the co-founder at Air Health, which recently won the Rise of the Rest competition run by former AOL CEO Steve Case. He's definitely very involved in the ecosystem. Jason, feel free to jump in. Tell us what plans you have for the future, what impact you're looking to create. Oh, you're on mute.
I'll be on mute. All right, Adam will give me a comment about needing a CTO here in a second. So thank you, Rajiv. Thank you so much, Digital Orlando, David, for inviting us to come on and talk about entrepreneurship. I know that I've wanted to be an entrepreneur since I was a kid. In fact, it kind of led to my path and choice of UCF for graduate school, and why I chose the Creole program, because I knew I wanted to be on the commercialization side of things. I've always wanted to start companies. I haven't always been successful. I had a startup company where I licensed some technology out of UCF, went through the business incubator there at UCF, and learned very quickly that I didn't know anything about being an entrepreneur or what it took to really run a business. Just because you have a PhD doesn't mean you'd be successful as an entrepreneur. And I decided to go back into industry and learn some more, and learn what it took to really commercialize technology, made that a focus, and worked for some of the world's largest photonics companies and some pretty big acquisitions. I worked for a company, Ocean Optics, here in town as their CTO. Decided that, okay, I learned enough and it was time for me to learn even more and start drinking from the fire hose as an entrepreneur. Learned very quickly that doing so in Orlando is sort of an uphill battle. You've got forces working against you, unfortunately. I call it the Orlando tax on, it's hard to raise capital. It's hard to have people take you serious when you're not in Silicon Valley. Those days are kind of changing a little bit, but still it's hard. And fortunately, I've had success with my company, Open Photonics, which became part of Luminar, Air Health. It's been a lot of fun learning how to circumnavigate the Orlando tax, but I actually have another saying. I say we want to leverage the magic of the region. And I think we could talk more about that in a bit as we talk about what it really takes and how we can grow companies in key areas where we have an unfair competitive advantage, like photonics, simulation and training, modality, growing in fintech, as well as challenges. So I've been through a lot kind of on this entrepreneurship journey and growing teams and how to get a team to move here to Orlando, how to hire the local talent. And all of that is required if we're going to grow the innovation economy and take advantage of some of the really great things that have been going on here for 20 plus years.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jason. So we did have another panelist, Rob Penepinto, who was expected to join. Unfortunately, he's having difficulties and he may or may not be able to join. But let me do a quick intro to him, and if he joins, we can get him right into the conversation. Rob is the president of Florentine Strategies, which does investments and mentoring in tech-related investments. He is founder and board chair at the Raleigh Social Enterprise Accelerator, and on the board of several major organizations in the community, including the Orlando Economic Partnership. A couple of years ago, he ran as the candidate as a candidate for mayor of Orange County. So unfortunately, he's not here yet. We'll weave him into the conversation as he arrives. But let's just dive right into it. But first, let's define this a little bit for our audience in terms of what we're going to talk about. We've heard a lot of talk about innovation economy, and I'm sure we've all heard it before. We've tried to compare ourselves to Silicon Valley. There was a big impetus towards moving towards an innovation economy 10 years ago or so, when the last major disruption happened and the real estate crash and the hospitality and all that was impacted. And since then, here we are 10 years later, and again, we have a big impact on tourism, hospitality, real estate, and we're still talking about why hasn't our economy diversified more. So let's define that term a little bit. What does an innovation economy mean? I looked it up, and it was originally proposed by Joseph Schumpeter, who defined it as an evolution of institutions in entrepreneurship and technological changes within a community that drives its economic growth. So with that, I'll direct our first question to Andrea. Do you kind of broadly agree with that definition? Feel free to change that to what it means to you. But more specifically, how far along do you think we are on that path to an innovation economy?
Sure. So the first part of the question, innovation economy, and I also talk a lot about innovation ecosystems. And I think the question is more about how you put metrics or key performance indicators around that and what the definition is success is around that, or the particular type of innovation economy that works for, various groups. And so again, especially at MBIA, it was really cool because it's not me or my opinion. It's seeing different ecosystems that work and finding those that are analogous to us, right? We are very unique in that we are so tourism and hospitality heavy. And Lord knows we're feeling that effect right now. While other groups and other, regions, counties, municipalities, you could talk about being less analogous. So it's, for me, I think it comes down to what's a successful innovation economy or innovation ecosystem to model. And then the next step would be, how to get there or who is analogous that you want to point to. And so you'll always hear me say I complain about everybody talking about Silicon Valley because I don't know if we have all the ingredients that they had. And more importantly, do we want to be them, right? What's our definition of successful innovation economy? And I think, working for somebody like Mayor Demings and seeing what's the opportunity, and again, just my personal opinion this time on, ecosystems that I crushed on, I do believe it's an equitable economy. I think, your residents need to have an opportunity to have higher growth, higher wage jobs, growth trajectories. And the coolest part is if they want to be an entrepreneur, well, let's help them be an entrepreneur and be their own boss and have their own company. And what's their definition of success? So, that's some of the things that I'm definitely interested in seeing programs that come out. Now, in terms of where we are on the spectrum, once you define all that, I still think we have a ways to go. I think the work that Tiffany's doing is incredibly important. I think, again, you hear the mayor talk a lot about this too, where we really do need to put in more equitable programs and really, foster that opportunity so that everybody can fulfill their dream. I know, Jason, you mentioned, right, there's a magical opportunity here. We live in a magical place. Obviously, in the news, we see all the time that, it's not considered that, right, for many, many residents. And so I'm fascinated by programs that have worked in, say, Memphis or New Orleans or Detroit, where you are seeing more equitable ecosystems, especially in the entrepreneur innovation range. Anyways, lots to talk about, but I think we're still, I don't want to say in our infancy, but I still think that we do have a long way to go to be analogous or similar to some of those markets.
Yep, fair enough. So since you brought up Jason, let's go to him. And Jason, you've talked about that phrase, which I've heard you say a couple of times too, leveraging the magic of the region. So what does that mean for you when you say that? What is the magic of the region, and what aspects are you referring to that are unique competitive advantages?
Yeah, so leverage the magic of the region is something that I created as part of the Entrepreneurship Alliance, is we're trying to create a group to support investment grade companies and grow entrepreneurship here. So we're not Silicon Valley, and I spent a lot of time out in Silicon Valley, and it's okay that we're not Silicon Valley, and we're not going to be Silicon Valley because we don't have access to the kind of capital or the investors or the stomach from investors to go invest here. They're very risk averse. They've got a great opportunity to invest in real estate and make much higher returns at much less risk from their perspective. So raising capital is hard. It's a big part of it. But leverage the magic of the region is leveraging the good that's here. If you're in optics and photonics like Luminar is, you have an unfair advantage because of Creel, because of Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Missiles and Fire Control, Harris, which brought Dennis down here, Kennedy Space Center, and lots of other companies that know how to supply optics and photonics technology, like the members of the Florida Photonics Cluster, into that industry. So we were able to hire people and build a team with over a millennia of man and women years of experience designing LiDAR systems. That's leveraging the magic of the region. You can do the same thing in simulation and training. You can do the same thing in fintech. You can do this, a lot of this around hospitality. If you've got innovation around hospitality, can't be a better place in the world to go do that. Maybe here in Las Vegas. Those are probably the two areas. But I don't think they have as big an entrepreneurial ecosystem there in Las Vegas. So that's leveraging the magic of the region. But then you take it a step further. And what do we have that's really good here? We've got world-class airports, great hospitality. You've got places that investors want to come to and conferences that people want to come to. How do we figure that out? So when we had people that we are trying to lure to come to work for us in Orlando, had really good jobs, didn't want to move to California, couldn't afford it or didn't see the value in doing so. They had young children. We were able to give some of those early directors and those early VPs and the early key hires things like silver annual passes to Disney World. If they signed the offer, we gave them, that cost us, $4,000 or so each family, for a family of 4, to kind of get them to move here. But it was an unfair advantage that Orlando had that you didn't have in Austin or Memphis or Nashville or all these other places that we are competing with other than Silicon Valley, LA, Chicago, New York, and Boston. So that was a way that we could, that's why I say leverage the magic of the region to have an unfair advantage. And it worked. We had 100% success rate in those key executives that we wanted to move to Orlando because we had something unique to offer. And we had a company that was growing and taking off. When I say leverage the magic of the region, let's make sure that what you're doing takes advantage of that. It doesn't mean you have to, but if you can take advantage of the magic of the region as you build and grow your business, it will pay off and then some.
Fantastic. So if you got it, flaunt it. That's what we're doing.
I'd like to pick up on the unfair advantage, and both from Jason's perspective and Andrea's, and that is, and look at it even at a higher level, and that is that we now have really an unfair advantage with regard to our economy, in that most, as we know, all tourism economies that predominated with tourism have been, devastated by the pandemic. But very few, maybe none, have the unfair advantage that we have of having a significant tech component to it. You're not going to find that in Las Vegas. You're not going to find that in Hawaii, right? So we have an opportunity then to leverage that tech component that we have, that Jason has just spoken about, and that I've been involved with and know well, that we can we can start mitigating our situation, and we are able to build out from the tourism disruptions that lots of parts of the country and the world are seeing. And in fact, a lot of those jobs won't come back. We have an opportunity to leverage our technology component to help us come back.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dennis. Yeah, that's definitely aligned with what Jason was talking about. Let me go to Tiffany for a minute. And Tiffany, you shared some of the programs that are so critical to the community that you're launching as part of BOT. But what is your opinion on the talent supply side? Do you see the depth of tech talent and, more importantly, the ambition to support what we're talking about in terms of an innovation economy?
Yeah, I think there's tons of tech talent here, and there's tons of ability to be able to upskill the talent that's already here. I think Orlando ends up losing a lot of talent because companies locally don't want to pay what tech talent is looking for. And so, sometimes they'll have companies that have their technology centers that are in other cities. And so being able to have more companies here that have their tech centers here locally, that they are paying good wages. Typically here you'll see some organizations that are not as work from home friendly, which is another reason you lose a lot of tech talent, because they're used to the flexibility. And so I think there's room here for our companies to really step up to the plate and be more tech friendly, and to attract better talent here if they change the culture. I think it's just the hospitality culture, the tourism culture, and but I believe the talent is here, and we've seen that, and we've seen the hunger for it with the programs that we're doing.
Wonderful, great. Well, so I'll go to Dennis next. Dennis, I know you as a huge cheerleader for our region. You're co-organizer of Startup Week in Orlando with me, and you're leading seed funders. Let's get into some tough love. How much progress do you think we've made in the last decade towards this goal of moving towards an innovation economy? And are we still in the same place we were before in terms of startups, or do you see that volume picking up? And if not, what's holding us back?
I've seen, thanks for the question, Rajiv. I've seen a lot of progress, particularly in the startup. I call it the startup phase, and there are terms, and I like to distinguish between what I call a startup and a scale-up. They're really both startups, but at the earliest stage, and this is what the range of development of a young company between an idea and what we call a minimum viable product, the startup phase. I think there is a really great support system here. There's great things being done at Starter Studio, UCF, Rollins, ICOR program, meetups, what we're doing with Orlando Tech Council. It's good, and I see a lot of public support for those activities. The next step, though, is where I see that we have had lacking in support, and that's what I call the scale-up phase. So you've got a minimum viable product, and now you're starting to interact with the customer. You're looking for customer development and adoption, and we certainly have some efforts here as venture scale-up. Starter Studio has a more advanced accelerator program. Project Orlando, Charlie Lewis's, and what we're doing with seed funders, Deep Work Capital. But it's really, it's not enough, and so that's the area that I would recommend or advocate promoting more is the scale up part of our tech ecosystem.
Makes sense. So let me go to Andrea next. And of course, Andrea, you're looking at it from more higher level, a more holistic view of the whole ecosystem. What are the gaps that you see in the community?
Sure. So I think most of I'm pretty transparent and probably to a fault, and I totally agree with Dennis. I came from that world before NBIA, right? I worked for the Venture Lab, which I feel gave the types of services and all of the coaching that was needed, and also really get those tangible spin out companies from local universities and folks who have the intellectual property and access to the labs to go from bench scale to something scaled, right? And I think, essentially getting rid of a group like that has left a big scarcity in the coaching and what should be there. And so, again, can't make promises because, I report to a board, but what we're hoping to do is to bring funding to programs like that, and ensure that some of the, we call it deep tech, but there's a range of terminology for it, where, investable, tangible asset companies, but they require that infrastructure to go scale and test and find their, alpha or beta customer base, that we have those resources with some of the larger substantial universities and even now state colleges that could afford those types of equipment and programs. And so I do think there is a gap there. We have conducted a gap analysis. I think that, there, again, going back to equitable programs, I think we still need to help our gig economy and our entrepreneurs that are creative service industry. That's why I refer to programs like Memphis, New Orleans, Detroit. They have very cool entrepreneur programs we could deploy yesterday. It does not cost a lot. The community rallies around because at the end of the day, most of those creative service companies don't necessarily have to sell to big. They can sell to your local residents, right? So programs that could support our creative service industry, which is massive here, and oh, by the way, might have lost their theme park or hospitality industry. There's a lot of consumers and residents here who could purchase from those types of players. The last one is I think GrowFL is a good program for our second stage companies, but I think we need to give a heck of a lot more love to our second stage companies as well and ensure that they have the full gamut of coaching and, just access to services and capabilities. So for instance, one of the things that we saw back in the day at UCF with the Venture Lab and the GrowFL running in the same location is that what's the next logical area for second stage companies? Well, new products, new services, new things coming out, which is essentially like running a startup inside of a larger company. But, if you get to that second stage level, it's a lot of operational executives, right? They've learned how to now sustainability or get really deep into sales. So it's almost like a new product development, new tech startup or new, play inside. So you kind of need some of that talent and to bridge how that second stage company could, further sustain growth and put some new products or new services in. So things like that, I think we need to look at, and hopefully, again, I'm beholden to a board, but hopefully of county commissioners. I think they're all very visionary, and I think they're all supportive of addressing these gaps in our community.
Fantastic. That's really good, Andrea. So going back to Tiffany, your upcoming cohort series is around startups. And how much energy do you see in the community around startups, and what aspirations do you have for the startup community?
Yeah, so we are at the end of we did a 6-month tech startup cohort program or tech startup series. That was really to prepare individuals for the startup ecosystem. I think there are lots of individuals that would love to enter into the startup world, but I feel like a lot of the programs from talking to individuals, it's very intimidating, to take an individual that has not been around investors and doesn't know all the lingo and doesn't have, someone that can invest, $50,000 or $100,000 so that they can quit their day job and go after this dream, right? So you have to be able to have programs that fit more diverse individuals that come from more diverse backgrounds. And when you do that, then you'll have more individuals that bring that innovation to the Orlando area. And so that's what we're trying to do with our program. That was our very first step into seeing what is needed, what do people connect with, and really understanding that sometimes they need resources that are a little bit different than what maybe a typical startup program would have. We have individuals that, because of everything that's going on in the world today, they were really interested in mental health. Understanding as a business owner, how do we deal with this other aspect of our lives? Because as a whole person, we have to bring our whole selves to the business. And so just the ability for us to be flexible in our programming was really important.
Fantastic. Let me take that dive on that question for a little bit with Dennis. So Dennis, you've been around the startup community. So in terms of starting a startup, right, and some of the questions and things that hold people back from becoming a startup. Well, first off, let me do a quick call out to, as I said, Startup Week in Orlando, but I also posted the link for Lean Startup Practitioners Group in Orlando, where people who are just curious about startups and want to understand the lingo and want to be with a community of potential entrepreneurs can go to that. I've pasted the link on meetup.com/Lean Startup Practitioners. But Dennis, for someone who's aspirational of becoming of launching a startup, what do you have to say to them for this particular time that we're in the middle of a pandemic? Is that a good time for anybody to be launching a startup?
It certainly is. I mean, of course, one has to, as Jason says, leverage the magic of the region, and obviously there's going to be some market segments that are going to be depressed and may, in fact, have difficulty in raising capital. But if you're at the startup stage, you probably are not looking at raising capital immediately. So there's certainly a lot of history of famous. In fact, the Great Recession of 2007, 2008, I mean, I think that's where Airbnb started. I mean, you can go down the list of some really fantastic successful startups that started in these kinds of times, you look around for for what's the unfair advantage, man. Maybe there's talent that's available that's not work, it's been laid off, or or they're underemployed and they're looking for something to do instead of sitting on Zoom all day long, right? So, I mean, think about all of the opportunities that this pandemic has actually, given us. Certainly, I think there's some good things
Gotcha.
that can be used.
Thanks, Dennis. That's great. Yeah, it's very helpful. One of those startups that started in the 2012 timeframe was Luminar. So next question for Jason. Honestly, Luminar is the poster child for exactly the kind of company that exemplifies the innovation economy, right? But at the same time, we should acknowledge that we don't see a lot of Luminar scale companies around. Maybe Magic Leap is the closest one, right, that are comparable. But two questions related to that. One, how do you differentiate the innovation that happens in Luminar versus some of the innovation that happens outside of it, like on the higher end with Disney and Universal, they have their own innovation tracks going. And then on the lower end, like a mobile app startup, like what is the difference between the innovation that you do versus what they do? And a follow-up, how do you explain that there are so few Luminars?
Well, the second one's going to be really hard to answer. The innovation, we made a conscious decision to locate R&D, engineering, and manufacturing here in Orlando rather than in Silicon Valley. There is no reason that either any of the companies out in California, large companies and tech companies in California, could not have done what we did. And there's no reason that any of the existing military companies that were here in Orlando, they could have done what we did. The challenge is the vision to kind of swing for the fences. We had a saying, go big or go home, very early on, and that we were going to literally design our systems from the chip level up, like down to the fundamentals. And that's a wildly audacious goal, to go say, we're going to go do this and build it from scratch based on fundamentals. That's really, really hard to get companies to agree to do, which is why I became an entrepreneur, because I didn't want to be held and told what we could and couldn't do. And that's not an Orlando thing, and that's not a Silicon Valley thing, because we were told by multiple VC firms on Sand Hill Road that what we were saying we were going to do could not be done. And I saw that as a head start to go do it while everyone else, the key, I believe, as an entrepreneur, beyond having a iron stomach risk, is the ability to see around the corner and see what other people can't see. If everybody could see what you see as an entrepreneur, it's probably a bad idea to go try and commercialize, because everyone else can see it. It allows you to file intellectual property, get all those patents, and we've done a really good job there. So we were competing not with a Disney or a Universal when it came to innovation. We were competing with the large tech giants in Silicon Valley that had significantly larger budgets than we did. But we also had access to Silicon Valley capital. And that was an unfair advantage for most companies here in the region. So to answer your sort of first part, really, really thinking big and having access to capital. And access to capital means two things, because for your second part of the question, there's plenty of capital here in Orlando and in Florida. There's plenty of capital. The problem is the people with the capital refuse to give the entrepreneurs the valuations. This is my view on things, and if Rob were on the call, he and I would have different opinions on this. But if you want, to what Tiffany was saying, if you want to pay people the higher wages and make competitive wages so you can lure people from out of the region, you have to pay them well, and you have to give them good benefits. Now, early on in our early bootstrap days, we gave a lot of stock rather than high salary, because you had to give them something to be a competitive offer. for the Lockheeds and the Northrops that we are taking them from. But if the investors don't want to give the company a decent valuation and hold the company back, you immediately crush the company's ability to take those big swings. You immediately push down the salaries, which means you're not bringing in the A players and the highest quality talent that you can get. And that to me is the number one growing pain that we're going to have to overcome in this region, that the investors, and none of the local investors invested in Luminar. They all had the opportunity and they all passed because our valuations were too lofty, too high.
Gotcha.
I've seen the same thing with Air Health. There was some investment locally, but we've really had to go outside the region. So if we can understand that the investors and the entrepreneurs need these higher valuations to raise capital, to not give up as much as the company to get there eventually to become that larger type company, then we have an ecosystem that supports entrepreneurship.
Gotcha. Let me follow up on that real quick because I want to make sure I double tap on that point that you just made, which is the valuation gap of how our investors look at it or local investors look at it versus others. Is that valuation gap, in your opinion, closable, or is that increasing?
It's absolutely closable. The problem we have is here we're competing against real estate deal flow. And it's my opinion, but real estate deal flow has very limited risk because you've got a hard asset, that real estate, as something that's your worst case scenario. A startup can go away. Let's be realistic. It can go away. It can also IPO for billions of dollars. So there could be very high returns, but it could go away, and you never know. I've seen entrepreneurs thrive in companies and have them grow and have great exits, and I've seen entrepreneurs have companies that failed and went away. So the investors need to understand the risk profile, the upside versus the downside, and not everybody has got the stomach.
Makes sense. Okay. So we're coming up on the quarter two. So my last question before we wrap up and see if there's any questions from the audience is the same question to all four of you. It's a magic wand question. If you had a magic wand and you could affect whatever change you wanted, or you had specific recommendations that you hope that somebody in the community would take and run with it and make happen, what would you want to see? And you can be to make Orlando an innovation economy in the next 5 years or get it closer to that goal. You can go as big, as ambitious as you want, or you can be as realistic as you want. And you can talk to any sector, government role, or whatever you'd like. But I'll start with you, Andrea, since you've definitely spent the most time of anybody trying to analyze that problem. What are some specific things you'd like to see?
So I guess I'll talk about my new obsession, I think, just because, again, between this event, Digital Orlando, and our simulation summit yesterday, and just kind of seeing the whole ecosystem, building on how I really do believe why European Union and Asia in particular can just get these investable, rich, ecosystems, and double, pun intended. There's investment, there's large, public and private sector buy-in. There's really this, the universities are churning out. They believe in K-12 STEM education and innovation. Singapore, like for instance, I mean, my God, if you look at everything they're doing from 4-year-olds all the way through the system, just unbelievable, right? So there's a lot of that I think we can achieve. But my new kick is really, you constantly need funding from somewhere else. And that, kind of that valley, that huge gap that even Dennis was alluding to, and Jason's been through it, and, getting these technologies scaled. I kind of have a new kick where I think we need to get all of our lobbying teams together and our legislative affairs together and really go hunt federal dollars for these centers of excellence or pilot project funding buckets, because we have the talent and the IP and some rock stars here in these verticals that everybody's talking about today. Why aren't we competitive enough, like a New York, upstate New York, and all these, senators and Congress folks that rally around and go, that $40 million from NSF, that belongs here. And I don't care if that's photonics, learning sciences, human performance, between the psychology and the simulation industry here, we should be these killer places to go, and not to spend that funding on a building, because Lord knows I've worked for a couple of organizations locally where that's not what it's about. If you need the enabling equipment or whatever it takes, big supercomputers, whatever, okay. But we're talking about putting money back into the economy, from researchers to the small businesses, even matching what large industry is willing to put in to get these pilot projects going. Because even back to the models and the talent here, we have enough infrastructure to even train on these best in practice solutions. So I think of people like Nicholson Center. Advent Health is willing to train all these thousands of doctors and healthcare professionals that come through on cutting edge healthcare. Tavistock brings in the Lake Nona Impact Forum and is talking about all these angles of mental health and, human performance, right? And the best and best that we have here to showcase on an international scale. I really think we need to bring some infusion of dollars in, and we are incredibly competitive to go get those dollars. And I worked at UCF for 16 years. I can tell you that I never saw a time where we really did band together and get everybody together to go fight for those dollars. But I think we have the right infrastructure and ecosystem and right players kind of lined up now, where there's no reason why we shouldn't attempt to go and get those millions of dollars infused, because we have the assets here that deserve that funding. And to be a national prominent, spotlighted cluster or whatever you want to, ecosystem, if you want to call it that.
Great. All right. Well, that was definitely crippled down on the investment theme. That's great, though. I mean, I really agree with that. And thank you for bringing up a very clear action item that, we could take forward as a community. That's great. Dennis, I'm going to pass the magic wand to you. What would you like to see, sir?
Well, just following up really on my earlier comments, I'd certainly love to see more support for scale-ups here and all that means. And really with this, as Jason has mentioned, the Alliance, looking at investable opportunities, I think having more effort there. Tourism has been obviously a major portion of our economy, and I've actually looked at some numbers recently. It seems like it's about 6 times larger than the tech component for economic impact here. And obviously what I'd like to see is a diversified economy, is an economy that has a much larger percentage of tech impact in our region. As everybody knows, it's high wage jobs. It's probably twice the average, wage of leisure and hospitality. There's been significant job loss, as we know. I think a lot of those jobs most experts that I'm reading about are predicting that a lot of jobs are just not going to come back. So we just have a great opportunity right now to really amplify our tech assets, and I'm hopeful that we're going to do that.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dennis. I'll go to Tiffany next. Same question, Tiffany. Magic wand, what would you do with it?
So I'll touch on something a little bit different. So I would like to see government build more policy that embraces and facilitates diversity. So even local businesses to embrace more policies that will bring about diversity, thinking about, how to better serve their employees, policies that would better bring about support entrepreneurs, programs that, even like the grant we have from BOT. When you have programs that that diverse people can be involved in, and they do build these companies. When you have diverse owners and diverse entrepreneurs, they then employ a diverse employee base, right? And so there's just many things that you can do locally that can facilitate and help to bring about a change in the culture of the region. And so I would love to see more of that.
That's a great take on it, Tiffany. Thanks. So, Jason, I'll pass that to you next. What would you like to see different, sir?
So maybe something a little bit different. And I know my colleagues on the Orlando Tech Council and the Entrepreneurship Alliance and some of the people on the panel are probably tired of me hearing this, but saying this, but we need to do a much better job telling our story. So I just listened to hear how we've got all this creative talent here in Orlando, and yet we are getting an F, in my opinion, on telling our story about the successes that we have all the time. I see he's on here. I will give a shout out to Alex from the OBJ. He has been phenomenal in helping to tell the story locally. And so I want to thank him for what he's done for the ecosystem in helping tell the story for some of those other people that aren't getting the kinds of press that we get internationally. But, I'm not, Luminar, we never took a dime of public money in terms of incentives or job creations, although we could have to start the company, because we felt, let's let the market decide. Now, we need to do a lot of work to help overcome that Orlando tax that we were talking about for the region in order to go attract real capital and make sure the capital is available here. We can go do that. But we're not going to be able to be successful in mitigating that tax if we don't get better at telling our story. We've got visitors, we've got people coming here by the millions that we could be sharing things. We could be leveraging all the conferences and the trade shows that are our convention center when it reopens and when we're having those here, and do a much, much better job at telling our story. If there's one area that I'd wave the magic wand, it would be that, and you'll see a lot more success.
That's fantastic.
In my opinion.
Thanks, Jason. So we've got a few minutes left. Honestly, I don't see any audience questions yet. So if anybody's thinking about it, your chance is fast passing. So jump into the questions real quick. But I'll give an open question to any one of our panelists who would like to jump in. Right. One of the models that we've seen successful is a big catalytic fund that powers a bunch of investment into the community. And Andrea, you touched on that sort of by getting maybe grants from outside of the community. But one of the things that I don't remember if it was Cleveland or Pittsburgh, one of them did that. They launched this big, I think it was a $50 to $100 million fund that until then it was, of course, part of the Rust Belt, and things were decaying and things were not looking good for a long time. And then this fund was launched, and within 10 years, they had a number of different exits that brought that money back into the community and then launched the next phase of development, and innovation economy was developed there. So open question to anyone who wants to jump in on that. What are the chances of us doing something that big, like go big or go home? Like, how do we do something like that catalyzes that movement? And what's holding us back from doing something like that?
So I can chime in on where those funding buckets came from again, because at NBIA, we saw what everybody did. One of the things that region has, we brought up the Rust Belt, which is a great intro to that, is something called the Appalachian Regional Commission. And because of all the decommissioning of, coal industry and some of these other industries, they have these regional plays that, frankly, very few other parts of the country has. So some of that funding comes from this regional, federal, if you will, group right off the bat. Okay, that's the first thing. But it takes state and federal governments to really invest that magnitude. And again, pretty transparent to say that we're in a state that I've never seen that. Working for Bridge, which was International Consortium for Manufacturing Research at that time, we had a very good goal at the beginning. And, why wouldn't you want to have this state-of-the-art, could be a foundry, for crying out loud, for America's military of semiconductor devices, great jobs, right? Even down to technical and blue collar jobs, but just really competitive and perfect for us in Osceola County, right? A tourism, agricultural rich place. So, I hate to be pessimistic, but we have not seen a state or governors supportive of really the tech industry, let alone manufacturing and all these other areas, for at least the last 3 governors. And that is a big, big, big deficit for us to replicate Pittsburgh and, frankly, the entire state of Ohio, which is breathtaking in the ability. That said, there are programs like what they built with private sector and banks, such as Jumpstart Inc., which I think is one of the greatest funding of entrepreneurs of all backgrounds, not just tech, but they do some work in tech investment. And you look at places like Columbus and Dayton, and those are programs with private sector that I do believe we are analogous and we could build. So sorry to be really passionate about that, but these are the things you can replicate versus it's going to be a lot tougher without a state that is supportive.
Got
it. Andrea, I'm curious what you're seeing on your end. Do you think that the pandemic, which is obviously impacting the entire state, may alter that thinking that you've been talking about for the last three governors? What do you?
I wish I was optimistic, Dennis, but no. And I think even in COVID management, which is your most pressing, right? And let's talk about the innovations around unemployment and the disaster of helping our state residents, right? In the most basic care, which is we are one of the states with the most furloughed, laid off, and you mentioned, just not to give everybody scary numbers, 247,000 claimants as of March for just our county in unemployment. And those people couldn't even access the most basic of services. So do I think we're being progressive and thinking, oh, we've got to diversify the economy? I'm really worried that I'm not seeing it, And again, that's just my personal opinion.
Well, we all have to get together to change that.
Yeah. That's great.
Our situation.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea and Dennis. This is great. We're about ready to wrap up here, but I want to give the opportunity for any of us who are trying to make some changes and differences to put out an ask to the community. So I'll start with Tiffany. Tiffany, how can our community help Black Orlando Tech?
There's lots of different ways. So one would be, of course, hiring more Black people and building a pipeline with local organizations to be able to hire the resources that we are training. Another would be to provide resources or access to capital, to information, to just various resources that we would be able to then give and share with our community. And then, of course, as I said in the comments, when there are diversity initiatives across the region, to include organizations like Black Orlando Tech that are already doing the work. We have some local companies that have done that, like EA and Universal. They have reached out to BOT to say, hey, how can we better work with you? That would be amazing. Just the partnerships. We could do so much more together. I think people make this diversity thing and this expanding tech and entrepreneurship into other communities a lot more complicated than it has to be when you include the people that are already doing the work that are closer to the communities that you want to reach. I think it increases the time to market. So
yeah. That's a perfect note for us to end on. There's so much opportunity here. I think there's a lot of different areas we could push on, most notably the investment side that we talked about, but also investment in the right programs like Black Orlando Tech. So with that, I'd like to thank our panelists. Thank you so much for a great discussion. I look forward to seeing some of the ideas that we've pitched here taking shape in the next 4 or 5 years. Hopefully we're not back here at that time saying, what haven't we done yet? Let's try to make some of that happen. And I ask the support of the community to do that. All right. All the best to all of you and all the great impact that you're making. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And great job,
Thanks.
Rajiv. Thank you.